Firas Maksad is the president of the Arabia Foundation. He joins us now from Washington. Firas Maksad, when we see Nikki Haley, the US ambassador to the UN, standing in front of what looks like an Iranian missile, and I stress looks like, do we have to accept that Tehran's footprint in Yemen is a fact and it's getting deeper?
Listen, I think that the writing is on the wall. Everybody knows that Yemen has been using the Houthis, Iran has been using the Houthis in Yemen to gain a leverage, to gain a pressure card on Saudi Arabia. Yemen being, on Saudi Arabia's southern doorstep, and therefore that important to Saudi national security. So yes, it might take some time for the UN to flush out the evidence, but having looked at all the components of that missile displayed by the US ambassador last week, I think there's little doubt in the mind of most analysts that those parts are originating in Iran.
Can we back this up a little bit? I mean, the Yemeni conflict is clearly no longer peripheral to Tehran's original designs, if you will. That's what Tehran's critics would say. But when was there a shift?
Yes, I mean, I think that's true. People would argue that Iraq, perhaps Syria, even Lebanon, Hezbollah there were much more important to Iran than Yemen. But Iran did seize the opportunity to capitalize on the Yemeni conflict. And as the Houthis grew stronger, it realized that they had something to work with there. And so it successfully transformed Yemen from a tangential issue to a key pressure card that it could use against its primary rival in the region, which is Saudi Arabia.
OK, Saudi Arabia clearly as well wants concerted action here on the part of external players and people who may, in a perfect world, bring some sort of pressure of diplomacy to bear here. But there's no appetite for that yet, is there?
No, unfortunately, I don't think so, and it's much to the detriment of the people of Yemen. We have to remember that Yemen, first and foremost, is a civil conflict, one pitting the many aspects of Yemeni civil society and the political groups there. So there is no easy solution, because even if the regional and the international powers that be were in alignment, it would be difficult to get to a political resolution to the problem there. And given the realities both in Tehran and in Riyadh, we don't see positive trend lines. We see negative trend lines where Saudi Arabia increasingly has to play defense to an Iranian offense.
OK, trend lines. How do people like Nikki Haley, how do people like the Russians untangle this incredibly complex picture and get beyond where they are at the moment, which seems to be apportioning blame on the one hand, whilst on the other hand, certainly for the United States, saying, look, there are other big issues to do here with Iran. The nuclear deal, Iran's regional ambitions, Iran's military ambitions in the region.
So yeah, if only you and I had the answer to that question. I don't think that we do here, but I think a good starting point would be a de-escalation. And certainly what we see today with the firing of this missile targeting the Saudi capital, really the Saudi equivalent of the White House, the Yamama Palace there, is not a step in the right direction. It is an escalatory move, perhaps one that was ordered straight out of Tehran. So this is, again, not something that will help to resolving the situation. And I think ultimately it would have to start with the regional powers, but we also have to be realistic that conflict containment rather than conflict resolution is what we could ultimately hope for, at least in the short term.
Nobody could ever answer my next question, but please give it your best shot. If you were inside the head of MBS, as he's known in the States, I mean, he is pretty much accepted as driving the Saudi part of this. When they're finding the remnants of those Qaim-1 missiles, the long-range Iranian missiles, allegedly, what's the feeling inside the royal palace in Riyadh? Is it consternation? Is it anger? Perhaps even frustration? Because they must feel that they can go so far, but they can't go any further.
Yeah, I certainly can't get into the head of MBS, at least for not that question. But I do think that it would be realistic to expect that there's a great deal of frustration. Yemen is a place that has been the graveyard of invading armies, just as Afghanistan has been for many centuries. There's an understanding that you can't really win in Yemen. But there's also an understanding that for Saudi Arabia, at least, this is a war of necessity. Having Iran come to dominate in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, The Saudi Arabia simply cannot allow for its own national security to let Iran come to be a power on its southern doorstep. And so really, you know, I think MBS would understand that this is a war that he must fight.
Firas Maksad there in Washington. Great to talk to you. Thank you so much.